Okay, now we should be live on YouTube, on X, and hopefully on Tumblr as well. I'm not sure, not Tumblr, Rumble. Though I'm not really sure about that. It would be the first time if it works.
I'm trying to load it on YouTube here. Oh, yeah, it's going.
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
Okay.
Can you hear the cat mewing?
No,
No,
I don't think
No?
really,
so.
no.
Okay.
Shh. They will mew more. Okay, so we are live.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. And I think this is the third time, maybe the fourth time, we have the RPG Pundit, the final boss of Internet Cheat Lords, with us.
Hello.
Hello and welcome. I think I'm going to steal your first question from the Pundit encounter
Okay.
to start with. I don't think you have answered it yet. I'm not sure because I haven't watched all the encounters. But well, even if you haven't answered it, it will be the first time here. So who has been good and bad to you in the hobby?
Well, you realize I've now been in the hobby for 20 years, so it
It's
could be a really long
a long
list
way.
in both respects, you know. Um, but I would say, okay, uh, the people who have been good to me were my first kind of RPG mentor, who was Eric Wujik, the creator of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles RPG and Beyond the Supernatural and Amber Diceless Role Playing. Also, Greg Stafford, creator of Pendragon. Also, I would say Sandy Peterson, Call of Cthulhu. Those are all guys that were, you know, way more famous than me that talked with me and that have been either just friendly or actually mentors like Eric was. And I mean, aside from that, there are a few other people who've been very good to me. I would say Brett Bernstein from Presses Intermedia, who has for many long years been the tech manager of the RPG site, which is a very thankless task. And so I think he's been a really stalwart guy doing that. He also published some of my earliest books. And then obviously, you know, the people that I've made friends with along the way in the OSR, who have, you know, taken on this mantle of doing the same kind of thing I was already doing, but that you know, there was a real before and after between, I guess it was around 2015, you know. It was a moment where before that I was pretty much the lone guy that was willing to stand up to kind of the swine of the hobby. And then after that, there were gradually the first kind of groups of people, 2014, 2013, 2015, that had begun to have the same will, the same determination to take the chance of standing up at the risk of being canceled. And since then, many other people have, including the two of you, right? So I think everybody who has been on the free speech side of the OSR has been good to me. As far as bad, well, let me think here. There's been a lot of people, like I think thousands of people who have tried to cancel me in this hobby, right? I think that among the most notable ones are probably Nicole Lindrus, who who was from was it Green Rodent, and she was the creator of the Blue Rose RPG. Several of the people involved in the Forge. Some of the early kind of trans activists of Google Plus, like Fiona Geist, who literally threatened to strangle me with piano wire. And there's what else have we got? We've got it's like this could go on for quite a long time, depending on how many assholes I want
I
to
can
name,
imagine
right?
that. Yeah, the bad part
Yeah.
would be a long list.
Yeah, it would be a very long list. You know, so
Well, since strangling you with piano wire is nicer than just to say, "Oh, you're a fascist." At least it's more.
it shows a little bit of creativity. I'll grant it
Yes,
that. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, the Alexandrian. The Alexandrian's an absolute piece of shit
Oh, you
and
mentioned
deserves
that.
everything he's getting now. Right? I'll definitely name him.
So, what was your interaction with him that made him be like that?
Here's the thing, right? The Alexandrian was an early OSR blogger, not particularly talented in my opinion, compared to some of the other people like Jeffrey Entz, for example. He was kind of in the same area as James Malazewski, right? Talked a kind of cool talk, but his ideas were mostly crap. And this guy, he's very leftist politically, right? Unlike many of the OSR people. And he got a particular hate on for me as I was beginning to grow in prominence as a blogger over, let's say, most of the rest of the OSR. And he basically wanted, he realized that I was, I wasn't as right wing back then as I am now, actually, but he realized that I was on kind of the right wing side of things, right? So he was one of the early guys to claim I was a racist and that sort of thing. And then he outright, I think it was 2013 or 2012. That was the rally for free speech in UC Berkeley, the one where Antifa showed up and tried to basically murder people, right? They fired fireworks into the crowd where there were grandmothers and babies. They were trying to assault people. But unlike the previous time that had happened, this time the right-wing people came prepared. They were ready. They had organized. They were prepared to fight. And they actually fought back and beat the living crap out of a bunch of Antifa people. There was a beautiful sight, right? These Antifa human garbage running for their lives as they were being chased by patriots, free speech patriots. So it was a beautiful thing, and I commented that it was great. And there's this particular image of this Antifa chick that is just how you can imagine. It wasn't trans, but other than that, it was what you would imagine. Imagine in your head a woman in her early 20s who is an Antifa member that thinks she is going to go kill Nazis, right? And that is what you have, right? And this stupid bitch, she shows up there and she's got I think she had brass knuckles or something. And she had done a video beforehand saying, oh yeah, I'm going to kill fascists today, right? And she goes running over to fight one of the guys that was like in the defense side of the free speech group. And he just goes and she's expecting that he'll be like hesitant, right? He'll be, well, I can't hit a girl, or where political violence is wrong, right? And that's always what they count on, is that you're not going to sink to their level. Well, fucking sink to their level, right? And this guy did. He just smacked her just open, not open-handed, a closed-handed fist punch that knocked her down, right? And it was just beautiful. I think she lost teeth. It was wonderful, right? And then it comes out. So I did a blog where I said, the fucking bitch deserved it. That was, I think that's the name of the blog entry, right? And the Alexandrian, looking for his chance, right? A couple of days later, it comes out that the guy that threw the punch might have been associated with like a white supremacist group, right? But now the media said that, so I still don't know to this day what the amount of truth of that is or not. But even if it was, there was no way anyone could know it at the time, because it was not a white supremacist rally that these people were at. They were literally at a free speech rally, right? A rally that was a response to a previous free speech rally at Berkeley where the Antifa people had basically scared everybody off, right? So there was no reason by which I would imagine, right, that this guy was a white supremacist. And I wrote, well, that doesn't really change anything, because the bitch still deserved it, right? And it's got nothing to do with what was happening there, right? It's nobody's cheering for white supremacy, right? And he goes, oh, so you won't deny it. So you are a self-avowed white supremacist. And then he went around like all over the internet saying the RPG Pundit is a self-avowed white supremacist, right? And that's why everybody should block him. And, and it was like, this was, remember early on, it was before Gamergate, right? So he was counting on that, like, that tactic that nobody really knew how to handle very well, which is they make this horrifying accusation. And it's kind of like, there's the old story of, the anti-Semite doesn't say that that the Jew stole his wallet because he believes he did. He does it to watch him have to empty his pockets, right? So it's the same thing, right? It's that you accuse someone of being a self-avowed white supremacist, so that they have to go, oh, no, I'm not really, right? And then they're like, oh, so you deny it. That proves you're a white supremacist. That sort of shit, right? But anyways, the guy also, one of the particular reasons I dislike him is because he ended up somehow taking over in Google Plus and then later in MeWe, and I think in Facebook too. I'm not sure. The DCC official fan pages or whatever, right? The main ones. He somehow finagled his way to being like an admin there, and then he's banned everybody he doesn't like there, right? So he's prevented me from being able to be on there and doing DCC stuff. Of course, I responded by making my own in MeWe, which ended up being bigger than the official one. And but the point is, this guy is just absolute shit. He's complete garbage. He has no compunction about lying. He has no compunction about defaming people. He lies and he knows he's lying, right? Same as Bruce Baugh. That's another piece of shit. That's the guy who he's said multiple times, right? These lies about me, especially when the 5th edition of D&D came out. Bruce Baugh was one of the leaders. That fat sack of shit was one of the leaders that was trying to do the consultant gate thing and get us denounced or something. They wanted to get us fired, but technically we were done working by then, right? The myself and Zach S. And Buzz always hated me because I shat all over his horrible, horrible version of Gamma World, like literally the worst version of Gamma World ever made. And because I point out that, he's a diabetic gas bag that can barely move, right? But, he also did kind of the same sort of song and dance where he said, oh yeah, the RPG Pundit is, he's an express racist and all this or that. And then that he said that I was opposed to the note on gender in 5th edition, and that was just an outright lie, right? It was just something he invented, right? And I said, no, that's not true. I'm not really opposed to that, right? And he just kept insisting that I was, right? These guys just lie and keep lying, So that's basically the game, right? That's how they do these things. So I can name many, many others, but those are some of the ones that mostly come to mind. And the fact is, there's like now the worst thing about this question you asked me is that there is now going to be like 800 people that are going to be so pissed off because they're going to be, how dare the RPG Pundit not name me? Because they want to imagine they were one of my worst enemies, right? And there's so many of these guys that are like, they show up on one of my X feeds today and they're like, fuck you, RPG Pundit. I'm like, do I know you? Right? He goes, what the hell? Of course you know me. You know, we had that. I took you down 3 years ago. You know, it was on a Tuesday, right? I'm like, yeah, okay. Look, I know that was like the most important thing that ever happened to you, but to me that was just Tuesday. You know, that it happens to me every day. So sorry, guy, you have to try a lot harder to be at the top of my villains list.
Okay,
All right, I hope that was a good enough answer for you.
yeah, well, I didn't know that the Alexandrian was also on the OSR. I knew him for his other games, but not from. I mean, I know there's a blog and he has blog, but I knew that he was involved with some Atlas games. I think, right? That was his job.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So how did you manage to not be cancelled in spite of that?
Magic, I think. Well, look, I very, very early on realized we had to make alternate media, right? So I was, in fact, canceled from RPGNet in 2003, right? I was also canceled from N-World, I think, in 2004. And that's when I said, okay, I see where this is going, right? So 2005, I end up taking over a website called Nutkinland and changing its name back to the RPG site, which was a much better name it used to have. And now I own the RPG site, right? So they can't cancel me there. Great. And then I'll go on any platform that is willing to take me. And if I know what the rules of that platform is, I will broadly try to abide by them without going too far into the breach of my own principles, right? So you also have to keep in mind where you should post what, you know. But there's a lot of places, a lot of contexts in which I can now act in a way that is pretty open, right? And it's become easier. It's become way easier in the last 4 years or so, right? 5 years. I guess let's put it this way. My first 10 years were way harder than the last 10 years of being the RPG pundit, you know, because there was a lot of challenges there. I was to some degree canceled early on when I was the RPG pundit. I hadn't started writing RPGs and I was still working in academia. And for example, there was I was due to give a talk, right? Nothing to do with RPGs. Right? It was a talk on what was it? It was something to do with Eastern mysticism in Penn State, and one of the administrators at Penn State, I guess, was an RPG person, and they realized that it was me, that I was the RPG pundit, right? And so they basically canceled the whole. You know, they were paying for everything, and they canceled the whole thing, right? So that was a long time ago now, but it was the one example that hit me in the real life. And so from that point, I realized I also had to change how I work so that I can become uncancelable in that sense too, right? And I mean, now I live full time off of making RPGs. Can't be canceled there, right? Like I don't have a boss. I'm not going to get fired from a job, right? I am in fact the one who finds or who gets publishers to come to him and offer to publish his books, right? So it's put me. My fame also, I think, has been one of the things that makes it harder for me to be canceled because I am so kind of well known within I'm infamous and famous in the OSR. But beyond that, I'm already I'm one of these figures that is of controversy in the further RPG world to some degree, and so a lot of people are like, oh, do we want to bother? Like, if we cancel the RPG pundit, who knows what'll happen, right? I mean, I got banned from the Bro SR managed to get me banned from Twitter for forever. I was banned from Twitter forever for about 2.5 days, right? And after that, the outcry brought me back, right? So that's part of the reason, I think, is I'm too big to be effectively banned.
So 20 years ago, you still lived in Canada?
No, I was already by that time I was already in Uruguay. Actually, I by the time the RPG pundit started, I mean, I was doing stuff in RPGs before that, but I was an unknown person, right? I hadn't developed the character yet. but yeah, by the time I started the RPG Pundit blog, the original one that was on Zanga.com, which doesn't exist anymore, by the time I started that, I was already living in Uruguay. Yeah.
How did you end up there? Did you have family there?
I have some descendancy from there from my mother's side, and also my grandfather lived in Uruguay. He was a representative of the Polish government in exile in London, right? The anti-communist Polish government, and he was essentially like the ambassador to the Southern Cone for that Polish exile movement, right? That pseudo government that they had. And for some reason he was based, I guess because Argentina was full of Nazis, I guess he was based in Uruguay instead of Argentina, right? And so my dad, when he was a kid, had spent time in Uruguay, right? And as for me, well, I'd studied academia, comparative religion and the history of religion. And I had at a certain point realized that becoming a professor was not going to be for me, right? That it was just too much bureaucratic bullshit, too much administrative pressures, too much demand to do things you don't really want to do, right? Like, I would have loved the teaching part of it, but I wouldn't have liked any of the rest. So I started to look for alternative possibilities. Because I decided when I was doing my master's that I was never going to do a PhD, right? So I didn't. And then I looked for alternative opportunities, let's say, and I found one doing work that was research work, let's call it, that was entirely online, right? I would do it on a computer. I didn't have to, as a rule. I mean, there was a head office, right? But I didn't have to go with any regularity, right? So I decided if I had that, right, and this is, remember, I'm talking about like 2003, right? 2003, 2004. I decided, no, 2002, 2003, yeah. Anyway, I decided that if I could go anywhere that had an internet connection, I could do my job. So why don't I travel? You know, and then I became like one of the earliest digital nomads, is what they call them today, where I was going from country to country, working in this online job, and just kind of experiencing the world. And I traveled to a lot of places. First, I traveled to a lot of places in Canada and the United States. Traveled to Mexico. I traveled to Europe after that. I was in England and France. And then I decided to go to South America, right? I was going to go to Argentina and which I did, and then to Uruguay. Later on, I was also for a while in Santiago and Sao Paulo. And anyways, along the way, I had been to a whole bunch of places that I loved, right? Like I loved England a lot. I loved France. At the time, New York seemed a bit appealing. Vancouver in Canada, I actually stayed there for quite a while and quite liked it a lot, and I'd been to Vancouver before. I was already thinking of moving there, and that was kind of like my big consideration was probably that, when I get tired of traveling, I'd probably end up in Vancouver. Because London and the British countryside was lovely and all of that. Paris was wonderful. It was an amazing place. I have an aunt there. But the thing is, there was always something that kind of got in the way, right? In Europe, it was the cost of living was very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was always in the United States, residency is very difficult. especially if I'm working a job that was not based in the United States. And then I ended up traveling to South America. And Argentina was okay, but I had no intention of staying there because it was at that time, especially in early 2003, it was a basket case, right? It had just had the biggest economic collapse of its history. And then I went to Montevideo in Uruguay, right? And Montevideo was just like, Uruguay is a country in South America, but it looks as if, like, if you didn't know that and you ended up there, like if you teleported there or something, you could imagine that it could be some like country in like the Balkan area, or like somewhere in the upper Mediterranean that is kind of Italian, kind of Spanish, and kind of poor, right? But it's not. But it's way more kind of European than it is in any way like indigenous South American. Almost all the people there are of European descent. And the architecture, the culture, a lot of it is either Italian or Spanish, and it's got all the nice things, all the things I kind of liked about European culture, but it also has a much lower cost of living, and it was very easy to like Uruguay is a country that doesn't have a replacement level of population growth, mostly not because of the low birth rate, but mostly because too many young people leave to go try to make more money in other countries, ironically. And so they don't have any problem. You can immigrate. As long as you don't have like a criminal record or something, you can immigrate pretty easily, right? And so I decided, like at first I just said, well, I'm just here for a little while, and then I met some people, and one of them had an apartment that was for rent, and I was thinking, like the job I was in at the time was going to be good for at least another 2 years. So I said, well, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll just move everything here. I'll commit to being here for 2 years, and I did that. And then at the end of the 2 years, I was able to like extend it again. And after that, I ended up just finding other reasons not to go, right? By that time, I was like starting to make RPGs, and I was involved in other things that were also that all of which allowed me to stay in Uruguay, right? And then I bought a house after, what was that, 2016. And now I guess I'm not leaving. I definitely wouldn't want to go back to Canada now. That's for sure. Canada's a complete.
Or England or Paris.
Yeah. Or London or Paris for sure. There might still be some nice places in England and France, but I would definitely not want to live in Paris today.
Yeah, not those two, definitely not. Damn bad places right now. So how did you end up? How did you decide that this is the time where I'm going to start just writing RPGs and nothing else? What happened?
Well, it wasn't something that I like just decided, but it was that I had finished working for the company that I had originally been a nomad for, and then after that I was doing a lot of a certain amount of consulting work, and I was giving kind of classes on Eastern mysticism and meditation and things like that. I was making a pretty low income, but it was still enough that I was able to always, I was always managing to cover all of my expenses for the months, and I've lived that kind of hippie lifestyle in the past before, right? All through my student years, I did, And this time I wasn't even high at the time, so it made it a lot easier to manage than in the past. I decided to try my hand at making an RPG, right? And the first RPG I wrote was Forward to Adventure, which was not tremendously popular, though it was apparently, it sold a few copies in English, and well, I mean, I guess it sold a few copies in general, and for some reason it was kind of popular in Germany. I had a bunch of Germans that really liked Forward to Adventure. and so it made a little bit of money, and that inspired me. I ended up doing a source book for it, which also sold a little bit. This would have been very small amounts compared to like to now, right? And then I did Lords of Olympus, and I did that one as an homage to Eric Lujic, who had died of colon cancer, and it was a way to kind of keep Amber Diceless, which was his baby, right, his great RPG, kind of alive at a time when it had gone out of print. And that one was quite popular also, especially in South America. It's actually Lords of Olympus is the most popular RPG pundit game in Uruguay, which is really funny because it's the only non-OSR one, really. And then I did No Murder, which is more of a party game than anything. And the whole thing, like I was never expecting, even up to that point, all these games that I published up to that point, I was never expecting that I was going to become a full-time game designer, right? None of those. And then what changed really was, well, I was working on Arrows of Indra, which was the first really serious OSR game that I did, right? Which is Arrows of Indra is basically Dungeons and Dragons first edition. If it had been, Jesus, where is it? There we go. If D&D was based on Indian mythology instead of Western mythology, and Arrows did a lot better than those previous games, but I still wouldn't have believed that I was going to do anything. But then Mike Merles, who had been when nobody knew who he was, he had been a frequent commenter on my early blogs. The guy had discovered me. He was obsessed. He loved like the stuff that I put forward on those blogs, and he had also been, kind of following my blogs ever since. And he knew when 4th edition came out, I predicted, because it was based on the story gaming model, it was based on the GNS model, I should say, from the Forge. I predicted that D&D was going to lose 2/3 of its customer base. And then when 4th edition finally fell apart, when they finally announced they were doing a 5th edition, Mike Merles was the guy in charge of that edition, and he wrote to me immediately, said, "Yeah, you know what? You were right. That was exactly the number that happened. So we want you to consult on 5th edition." And so I did, and that upped my level of kind of how much attention I got to a whole other dimension, And apart from having made quite a good bit of money consulting for Wizards, after that I said, well, I should do something else. And I'd been doing a campaign for just a little while at that time that was based on that was the Lamentations of the Flame Princess campaign during a kind of fantasy version of the War of the Roses. And I said, well, I could I could put this all together and make like a setting book for it. And that became Dark Albion. And Dark Albion became a super seller compared to everything that had been there before, right? I think at that point is when I said, you know what, I could probably really just do this, if I really put my effort into it. And it took quite some time from there to where, my income was entirely RPG based, right? Like, but it was, but it, I got there in the end, I guess, and it's if people ask me, how do you make money in RPGs? And like, it's hard for me to answer that. Like I'd say, well, be the RPG pundit, and it'll take you about 10 years, and then you'll be able to make a full-time living off RPGs.
Yeah, it's not easy to do that. No, definitely not. Even here in Portugal, no. I'm assuming that you cannot read the comments because you are looking at your phone, right?
Well, I've got the chat up on my desktop here because I just.
Okay, so we have a question here.
But I haven't had much chance to read them at the moment.
There's a question here from Warp Plots about Eastern mysticism. Can you specify a little bit more? This was a little bit ago, but
Okay. Well, I studied in the University of Alberta. My specialty was on the history. I had a degree in history of religion, and then I have a degree in comparative religion. And my specialty was really among a couple of others, but the one that I focused most of my career on was on esoteric elements of religion. So looking at all kinds of things that are from the kind of more mystical or esoteric, mystery schools, secret societies, hermetic magic, mystical cosmologies, in different cultures, and making comparisons between them, and that gets pretty fascinating, anyways. And along the way, when I started studying religion seriously, academically, I mean, right? I was confronted by this reality that there's. Alan Watts said this. It's not me, right? But he said that there's a problem with being a comparative religious scholar, which is that you only have two options, right? You can be objective, and by remaining separate from the thing you are observing, or you can be involved, participating in the thing that you are trying to learn. And the problem with the latter is that when you do that, you lose all academic perspective. And the problem with the former is that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Right? Because if you don't get involved, you really don't end up knowing anything about it. You're only looking at it from such a distant view. Like if you're not involved in the experience, how will you actually know what you're looking at, even, right? And so I had from very early on been the guy that said, no, I've got to get into it. Right? I have to go in there. I have to do these things and see what they're about, And I got involved in a number of different Eastern esoteric movements. I went to all kinds of different trainings and teachings and things about different, both different like ancient traditions, modern things, and systems of meditation and systems of initiation and things like that, over the course of the years, to the point that in some of them, there were some that I found particularly worthwhile and have practiced basically ever since, and in some of those I had obtained a position of someone who was qualified to teach, so I have at times taught in those things, I see Judd Goswick's comment there.
yeah.
Like, which religion is taller, which would win in a fight? I like that. Well, actually, comparative religion is all about this idea of the perennial philosophy. So that there's this idea that there's a fundamental basic human religion, and that all modern day religions, all tribal, everything from tribal religions to like the newest weirdo cults, are attempts to look at that perennial philosophy, or an attempt to try to understand that one kind of original and true human religion. And then there's the debate of where does that one true human religion come from? Right? Is it something that actually exists in the universe, or is it a product of our minds? What is it, right? And that's what comparative religion looks to try to answer. And of course, it never actually does answer it totally, but it leads to a lot of very interesting insights along the way.
Judd wants Sylvia to start grilling Pundit with questions about the Invisible College. Well, maybe we can do that.
Yeah,
Sure.
well, we talked about the Invisible College a lot in the other two times.
We did, yeah.
Doesn't mean that we can't talk about it again, but
If I remember correctly, you had either released it recently when the first time. Yeah,
I think so. I think that was around the time that, the last time I was here, I think.
I know the first time we talked about it a lot, and I think you probably talked about it the second time.
Probably, but I don't mind. We can talk about whatever you want.
So, what was your, from your own perspective, what was your biggest achievement in role-playing games? Of course, not.
My biggest achievement in RPGs? Well, that's a really tough question, actually, because I would say I guess it depends on whether we're talking about the kind of professional side of my career, or if we're talking about what I've done for the hobby, or if we're talking about what's my kind of the thing I'm most proud of that I've created myself, or something like
Yeah,
that.
I was thinking more about what are you most proud of, not necessarily what was the biggest success, but what are you most proud of?
Right. Well, I think the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of my own achievements in RPG design is that I've surprisingly been able to get a lot of people into playing a version of D&D that is more authentic to history, right? Historically authentic. That's I think changed some people's perspectives of what's interesting about play, right? And I don't know if I've been as successful in getting people to like stop reading fantasy novels and start reading, history and mythology. But even if they don't, if they've drawn a little bit out of like the Old School Companion and Dark Albion and Baptism of Fire, and are using some of that to make their game just a little bit more medieval authentic, then I think that's kind of a big culture change accomplishment that I did. And I mean, of course, I'm also kind of proud that I helped to create the most successful D&D edition of WotC's history, and maybe the most successful one ever. We're not sure really whether the basic expert set, or whether the basic set of 1982 or the 5th edition rulebook sold better or not. So I proved my theories right. That's something else I'm very I'm very proud of. Right, the Forge theory was completely wrong and nearly wrecked D&D, and my theories were right and made the most successful version of the game of all time. Right,
Well,
that's not a small accomplishment.
I think everybody with the same mind would see that the first theories were all wrong.
Yeah, and
Well,
and I guess
sorry.
the last thing I would say is that I'm also proud that I almost kind of at first single-handedly turned around the kind of culture of the woke hipster leftist that was infiltrating our hobby. And I think if I hadn't been around to do that in the early days when there was no one else doing it, they probably would have become way too entrenched by the time 2015 came on. By the time Gamergate happened, they would have been much more entrenched in the hobby than they were. And so that I think might have prevented them from becoming too strong to defeat.
Well, definitely, your medieval authentic has created a large group of fans of yours that are basically interested in that.
Yeah, and now there's people trying to do the same thing too, right? Like there's slowly but surely people that are like going, well, we should make this setting. And maybe they're not making like 100% kind of like, maybe it's not like 15th century Germany or something like that, but it's a fantasy world that's like got way more authentic elements to it, and I've been very pleased about seeing how people have taken my stuff and been inspired to do their own.
I've noticed that the Pundit files that sell the best are usually medieval authentic. The other stuff,
Yeah.
it's not as well.
No,
Not-
I know that's true. So right now I've been pushing a lot of my the Sons of Heaven setting, which is
yeah,
funny because I'm using kind of historical, authentic principles to fuel what the setting of this sci-fi campaign is going to be like, right?
but it's
Did
not
you
exactly
expect
the
it? I mean, or were you disappointed that Invisible College didn't sold as much as other some of your other books?
Well, that's a two-pronged question, I'd say, because I always expected, because it's just a truth in RPGs that fantasy always sells better than anything else, right? And then the second best is sci-fi, and that's usually like straight sci-fi, but it sells a lot less than fantasy. And then everything else comes like third, right? So I was never expecting that the Invisible College would be a a smashing hit. The Invisible College is a game I wrote in large part for myself, right? As like the collection of everything that I kind of knew and believed in terms of the Western esoteric movement, and I just thought it would be cool that way. Uh, but at the same time, there were problems with the publishing. There were decisions that were not the best, maybe. The and it definitely performed less well than I could have hoped. Right, I was never expecting it was going to be like an adamantine bestseller or something like that. Right, but I was kind of expecting that The Invisible College could have been a gold bestseller by now, and it still isn't. So that kind of saddens me a bit. Because it's also like it's a fantastic game and it's full of fantastic OSR resources in there with like all of the magic stuff that it has. Even if someone never actually wanted to play it as is, they could just tear it apart for stuff they could use in like any other OSR game. But I think maybe it was too big, right? A book that size becomes more expensive, so it gets out of the curve. Yeah, it's difficult.
just answering this question. It's not. We are not publishing anything, but we are selling the Pundit files. So we are
That's
not
right.
the publishers.
Pundit Files, very kindly, the Red Room has hosted the Pundit Files, and I'm going to be very sad when you guys shut the store down.
Yeah,
Because to me it was a lot of fun actually to get to do this in the Red Room store, and I guess we're not gonna. I don't know if the last one that I put out when I guess in December or whenever it is, depending on when it is you guys are shutting down.
yeah. The end of.
All right, so I don't know if that'll be like the last of the Pundit Files. I do know that I've spoken to the publisher, to Mad Hermit, and he says he agrees with me that what we're going to do is we'll in due time we will transfer them over to Drive Through, so that maybe there'll be some new audience that will catch it there. But we're going to be doling them out like one a week or something, so that it catches on. And of course, several of the Pundit Files that I've put out so far are going to be part of Sons of Heaven RPG and setting, which I guess I can announce here. I don't know if I've actually announced this before, but it's going to be published as a full book by Mad Hermit, right? By Mad Hermit Press. And it is going to be a complete RPG for space opera that is set in this very particular setting of mine, which is inspired. I mean, it's inspired by a lot of classic sci-fi, right? But it has a historical element in that kind of the backstory of it is coming out of the Old Testament. So it's a kind of biblical story in space, you could say.
Do you know when that will be ready? Next year, maybe.
I am guessing it'll probably not come out until early next year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
although I've been writing it up faster than I expected, in part because a lot of the text is going to be from some of the Pundit Files issues, right? There's going to be a lot of stuff in there that was not in there, including the complete, rules of how to, like it's going to be a full RPG. It's not just going to be a setting book. But
yeah, I'm definitely that's one that I'm probably going to like. And when
Well,
that
I've
one,
been now. I'm working on the section on like aliens, both sentient and like alien animals, and I think I've got some pretty good tables in that one. I've got to say, it's looking pretty good.
so right now I assume that you are working mostly on that one, or
I
do you
am.
have
I am. I was
any
in a bit of a, besides writing the Pundit files, I was kind of uh, after the last Vikings, I was in a bit of an uncertain space as to what my next project would be because I've got several things in my head that I would like to make, but I was kind of like dawdling. And for a while I was just doing Pundit files issues. So you have to do if you're doing one every. At one point we were doing one every 2 weeks. Now we've moved to do it every 3 weeks because that's actually a lot of it can be tough to get one in that time period. Right, 3 weeks is a lot easier. And I wasn't really sure which would be the next project I wanted to tackle, and then it kind of came out organically. Well, let's do Sons of Heaven. So that's the one, and I think it's gonna be a very good sci-fi RPG. If people liked, the rules are going to be very similar to Star Adventurer. The setting is this pretty epic kind of. Space opera. It's standard space opera. It's got a lot of aliens that are kind of tropes. It's literally got like the gray aliens. Those were the aliens that had like enslaved humanity thousands of years ago, and evil machines and things like that. And a lot of it is very classic, but then it also combines with this concept of like civilizational collapse in space, and you are the people, the keepers of the. I mean, you could play scumbags if you want to, right? And I know the Red Room kind of prefers scumbags, right? So you could play, wretched Sons of Heaven, right? That's not a problem. There's nothing in the campaign that forces you to be like the good guys, but the kind of the default campaign is that either you are looking for lost treasures of the fallen Confederation, or you are one of the groups that is trying to restore the Confederation against all these enemies, either for political reasons, right? Like you're a champion of the Confederation, or you're a part of the alliance that Dalian is creating, or because of religious faith, right? Because one of the really interesting things about this setting is that it's far distant future in space. And usually in space opera, people are kind of like not really religious at all, right? Maybe aliens are, right? Or like weird shit like Dune. But for the most part, it's not really a consideration. But in this setting, and I explain why it would happen, right? There's this whole element of which the humans, after they were kidnapped from Earth and forced to be slaves for thousands of years, and after they escaped from that slavery, the one thing that bound them and that really managed to bind the Confederation was their faith in the Lord of Heaven, right? Which was the name that they gave for the one God that they believed was the God that humans on Earth worshipped long ago, right? And they kind of rebuilt that religion from like 4 books. There were only like 4 books that had survived from Earth, right? And they took those 4 books and put them together and created this absolute monotheistic faith that is it's very similar to most of the monotheistic faiths, and they use that to create the moral bridge for an intergalactic civilization that then later got wiped out by the machine wars, but now they want to bring it back. So it's I think the concept is a very interesting concept. That part of it is the twist, really, that makes it different from other space opera settings.
are you thinking about any other game that will be next to that one? Is there a plan already?
I've always got a few things that are kind of in the back of my head, kind of like on deck, right? So I've for a long time I've wanted to do a kind of a return to Albion, and that is happening now in one sense, in that there's a publisher who has asked me if I would like for them to do an omnibus edition combining Dark Albion and Lion and Dragon together, and and I said, sure, right? And so they've been working on that for some time. That's kind of going slow, but at some point that's going to be published probably. But what I also wanted to do is go back to like the land of Albion, but in a different time period, which is the time that was called the Anarchy, which was the war between Robert and Matilda, right? When the only heir of the previous king was drowned in a boat, and then he made his daughter the queen, except that her cousin, who was male, said "fuck that," right? This is patrilineal, right, by men, and it started a 20-year civil war in England that was like unbelievably devastating, right? That's also the same time period as the Brother Cadfael detective novels, which if you've never read those, I strongly recommend them. They're about a monk that solves murders in the time period of the Anarchy. And so I wanted to do that. I've also wanted to do a historically authentic game set in the late Roman Empire. And so I'm going to do that sometime too. I've also would like to do a setting expansion of Sword and Caravan for the Song Empire. Those three are always on my mind, and I never quite get around to any of them yet. But I'm sure I will get around to them eventually. Probably the Roman one will be next.
How do you pick when you want to do which project will go next? Just what you feel like doing at the time?
Yeah, exactly. It's like because you have to come up with, like, I've come up with 3 concepts there, let's say, right? That's the easy part. The hard part is like, what are going to be the executions? And when you start really thinking, well, what would be the classes? What would be the enemies, right? Like, what are you playing it in, right? Is it just standard fantasy? Is it horror? Is it something like, for example, the one that I'm thinking of doing in the Roman Empire might end up being kind of like, the premise of the Invisible College, where you're like secret agents fighting supernatural opponents, right? But in the Roman Empire. So that could be something that gives it a premise that makes me want to do that one faster, right? So it depends on how much I'm thinking about the elaboration beyond the kind of just the basic, it's in this time period or something.
What about the Pundit files? What will be next? Do you know, or it's?
Well, yeah, I can tell you what the next couple of them would be. So the latest one that has come out now is, I believe it's 50 Maniacs, which is a collection. It's just a collection of like 50 character profiles with general notes on their powers and abilities, but not exactly, like I want to mention, it's not fully statted, right? It's 50 characters. What you get there is their story, their background, their weird abilities, their general level, their general alignment, and like, what weird stuff they do. And these are all characters that were actual NPCs in my 12-year-long and counting DCC World of the Last Sun campaign, right? So it's, if you want to like get inspiration for weirdo NPCs you can throw at your party to just make everything go a little funnier, that's what you ought to pick up, right? That's number 39. And the next one after that is going to be another medieval authentic city guide, like how I had done before with Baghdad, for example. But this time we're Poznan. This time it's going to be Krakow, the southern capital, you could say, of Poland. It's a guide to what the city of Krakow looks like, what's in it. It's got random encounters, it's got random, let's say, adventure seeds is probably a better way to put it than encounters. It's got all the details I could get on what Krakow was like in 1025, which is very difficult. There's very little reliable sources for that, but I kind of extrapolated a little bit in some areas, and in some cases I had to make a decision about, like, is this right or is that right? So I can't guarantee that it's like that if you traveled back in time it would look exactly like in the book, but I think I've done a pretty good job of it, and it's a really interesting city, the way it works, and because it's a power center, but it's also it's like on a massive trade route, the Via Regia. And at this moment in time, that the city has begun to grow out of control, you could say, because of the amount of trade that's going through, because it is completely in an area where it's completely peaceful. It has no risk of being invaded, right? So it's suddenly it's a boom town. Krakow is a boom town in 1025, and that brings with it a whole bunch of challenges and problems, and then the next one after that is the aliens. I'm going to put out an issue where I reveal most of my alien section for Sons of Heaven. And then after that, I don't know, but I'm gonna keep doing it until you guys shut down. I don't know how many more issues after that it'll be.
Yeah, you should have at least 4 more, I think.
I guess, yeah, probably 4 more.
Probably, yeah, until the end of the year.
Yeah.
3 weeks. It was mentioned before, but it's something that I would like to know a little bit more about the Forge and how you connected with that. Were you in their forum discussing with those guys, or was it somewhere outside the Forge's forum?
No. So the place where I first became aware of the Forge was in RPGNet, before they banned me there. Right at that, there came a point in 2001, 2002 that the Forge people left well, they didn't leave. They expanded beyond the website of the Forge, to promote and preach the ideas of GNS theory to the unwashed masses of the RPG world, right? To all of us little people. And so my first encounters with these guys was them posting threads on RPGNet, making these unbelievably stupid assertions, right? Like these ridiculous ideas. And I started arguing back with them about it, right? And eventually I started kind of researching into it, right? And tried to figure out who were these folks. So I visited the Forge website as a visitor, right? I never signed up to it. And very carefully, I read the vast majority of Ron Edwards' sometimes very lengthy, stupidly pretentious academic papers on.
It was so boring. So.
Yeah, it's horrible. It was horrible. But I mean, I was trained to do that sort of shit. Right? I've read some other really terrible papers about other stuff too. So I was well placed to do this, and I could exactly tell because of my training in academia where all the bullshit was. Right.
Yeah, it was very.
And so I never actually got onto I don't know why, but I mean, I guess I still do this, right? Like, I don't go to like openly left-wing places or openly, anti-OSR places or something like that and fight them on their territory, right? Not if they are presenting themselves as this is the place for this thing we like, right? I'm not going to go in there and fight them, right? When they come to ours, I'll fight them. I will fight them in a neutral area. I'll make a video about them on my YouTube now, right? I'll say these guys are assholes, right? But I've never felt like I need to take the fight to their turf or something like that, right? And obviously for me, it was actually better at the time to put my arguments on my blog, which would have way more people seeing it. This was back when people actually still read blogs, you could get a lot of views in a blog. So me going after them in the blog was a much better venue for that, And Ron Edwards never really deigned to face me himself, right, in debates, but there were an awful lot of Forge people. I don't want to say he sent them, because I'm not sure if that's true or not, because a lot of these guys were, some true believers that they would have gone to fight, in the name of their profit for themselves, And I had a lot of arguments with those people on a lot of places, including they'd come to the RPG site, and that's fine because the RPG site is a free speech area, right? But they just know that they're not going to get any special advantages either. And we'd have those fights there too, right?
The Forge was very popular here, and I guess you can understand why. You're Portuguese, and most people involved in the hobby are very pretentious and arrogant people. So they found those the GNS theory very much to their liking.
They were just proving to them that they were smarter than everybody else.
Well, that's the only
They're
thing
always
that made it appealing to anyone, right? Is that this idea was, oh, this is like super intellectual stuff, right? Because he covered it in intellectual gobbledygook, right?
Yeah.
Which is, by the way that anybody in academia can, in any serious academia, can immediately recognize a guy that is inept or incompetent, right? He just covers it up with word salad, because to actually, like, an actual sign of academic or intellectual ability is if you can explain something really complicated to somebody who is not educated in the subject using common words, right? If you can't do that, you're not smart enough to be considered an academic, right? If all you can do is shout words at them that they're not going to understand, and then say, oh well, it's beyond you, right? People like us have to understand. Like that is just the biggest sign of midwittery that you could possibly have. So yeah, like, I mean, I know that, but you're right. Pretentious people. That was the whole appeal of the Forge. It was to let people who are pseudo intellectuals feel pretentious, and be like, oh well, no, you just don't understand it. No, it's not that you don't understand. It's that the theory is complete garbage, right? It has no foundation in anything, And then I rebut it, and I rebut it in ways that are smarter than they were, and that the normal person reading could understand what I was saying.
Yeah, they were very good at that, at creating that kind of aura that they were very bright and everybody else was stupid and all that.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole appeal. Just like, with like wokeness, it's the appeal that you are, a more moral person than everybody else.
And
In
most
fact,
of them are woke, right?
In both cases, it doesn't require you to do the work, right? Like the Forge didn't require you to actually think about things, right? and wokeness doesn't require you to be the slightest bit of a good person. It just requires you to be a cheerleader for whatever you're being told to cheerlead,
Yeah, just have to pretend. Virtue signal a lot, but
yeah, absolutely.
Never do anything about it. Well, and since we are talking about wokeism and all that, I think there are a few things from this week.
I just saw that
Wizards of the
illustration
Coast and
today.
all that. I was watching a Diversity and Dragons video about that. That beautiful illustration. I'm going to show it
Yeah,
to you.
I did a video about that too.
But I'm going to show the illustration anyway.
Hmm?
Very nice. This one here.
Yeah, that's the one.
So this was a pride related, or I'm not sure pride, but at least gay rights.
Well, it was supposedly about National Coming Out Day. That's what I've been told now, right?
Oh.
That apparently, because they have to have a holiday every single month. So, like, I would say the LGBT, but it's actually the TQ plus people have to have a holiday every single month to make sure everyone remembers them, right? So this, apparently in October, it's National Coming Out Day, and this is Wizards of the Coast made this image in honor of that, and they're also doing like some kind of special Magic the Gathering thing that I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if it's a deck or what, because I don't give the slightest fuck about Magic the Gathering, right? But they're going to raise money for that to go to something called the Trans Lifeline, which is apparently it's a supposed charity, but there's been some controversies because the Trans Lifeline is highly political, right? It's part of the aggressive kind of side of the trans agenda, and allegedly there have been people that have threatened violence on other people and called the Trans Lifeline, saying they were going to do violent things, and the Trans Lifeline encouraged them to do it. That's what I've been hearing apparently. So it's like an incredibly political thing, right? It's the kind of thing that, like, if some kid calls there, they'll tell him to leave their parents' house and go and you could be fostered by a pair of trannies or whatever, that sort of thing, right? They're completely lawless and willing to subvert everything, right? And Wizards of the Coast is giving them money. Now, I like in this image, right? So a lot of people have made a lot of comments, and it's all, it's a ridiculous, it's just garbage as a concept, right? But the centerpiece is obviously the two gay characters or whatever, LGBTQ characters, and everybody else is so, happy about their love and all this. And you'll notice the beholder that's there, right? Because there's a beholder, there's a white dragon, there's kobolds and a bugbear there, right? And they're all just like normal people that are hanging around, right? But the beholder in particular, it's got like this kind of heart-shaped thing, and it's where its eye is supposed to be, right? Instead of his iris is turned into this heart in the LGBTQ colors. And John Delarose, I'll credit this to him. He says, well, that in D&D, a beholder has the power with its eye beams to control your minds, right? So what's really happening in the picture is that the beholder has taken a pair of adventurers, hit them with the eye beam, and made them into sodomites. And now he's laughing at how he's controlling them and the whole rest of the town, right? And I thought that was very clever, but I had to respond to him. I said, no, I think you're wrong, John. And the reason for that is that for that theory to work, there would need to be somebody employed by Wizards of the Coast today that still knows what beholders do. And there isn't. There's nobody left there that would know what a beholder does. So his theory's wrong. It's funny, but it's wrong. The beholder is there because they have no idea. They think it's the cute little floaty blob.
Yeah, we have a comment here from I was raised a pork child. The beholder Care Bear loves child. That beholder does have a bit of a Care Bear vibe.
He does have a Care Bear style, but again, that's because it's these infantilizing colors, right? It's not the LGBTQ colors, right? Because those are like the rainbow thing, but this is very clearly the trans colors, right? The pastel blues and purples and kind of magentas or whatever, and light orange, right? And all of those are like nursery school colors, right? That's what they are. These soft, they're called pastels, right? In English, they're very soft, gentle colors, the kind that you would use with toddlers, right? And it tells you something that group has got that color scheme going for them to try to appeal to a certain group of people. Those are infantilizing colors.
And in spite of the... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that some of them like to wear diapers, so...
Yeah, well, that's right.
In spite, I was saying that in spite of their latest releases have been not really successful, to say the least, but they keep doubling down on this.
Yeah. Well, I said my post of this image was, which I had to like screen capture because D&D Wizards D&D X had blocked me ages ago, right? They blocked me quite a few years back, as soon as Mike Mearls was fired, basically. But I said, Watson keeps tripling down, and they are. The thing is that some people are saying, well, they're doing this for the money. No, they're not doing this for the money. It's impossible at this point. That's one thing you must say. They are not doing it for that, because like the sales of the new 2025 or 2024 edition rather are so bad. They are so unspeakably bad, unbelievably terrible, that they have to know that they've made a terrible mistake. So I think they've just like said, well, screw it. Hasbro's going to shut us down sooner or later. Let's just keep going with these things we believe in. Screw everybody. Like I think that this is literally like this is almost like what do you call it? A cry for help, right? It's like a suicidal person going on a last bender, because I would not be surprised if the sales numbers in North America for the new Player's Handbook, the 2024 Player's Handbook, right now is averaging 2-digit sales per week, if not, maybe low 3-digit sales. Like it's been such a flop that it's like unthinkable. There are OSR games that are selling more in a month than the Player's Handbook 2024.
So what do you think is going to happen? They're just going to shut down D&D in a while?
It's really hard to tell because it's hard to know how infiltrated the kind of woke part of it is. I presume that this is going to change, right? There's one thing, like in my video, I pointed out, Wizards has done tons of stuff like this, right? With these kind of images or statements or whatever that are just directly meant to piss off normal gamers in favor of some chosen group, whether it's Black women or LGBTQ or whoever, right? And anytime they do this, you're going to get, at least in the last few years, a ton of people are going to post negative comments on their channel, right? Telling them, that this is ridiculous, you suck or whatever, right? But you always used to also get an equal or greater amount of positive comments from virtue signalers on social media that would jump to Wizards' defense. But this time, if you go there, at least, I did this, what was it, early yesterday, right? And at that time, there were like, I don't know how many hundreds, if not 1,000 comments already. And I was looking through them, and then the ratio of like negative comments was somewhere above 98%, right? Like there was hardly any attempted defense of this. And that tells me that the woke people themselves have given up on D&D. Right? I think that they're too busy having to worry about other things now that are more important to them. Like, they're being confronted now, like Antifa people are being arrested now, finally, right? And they're being canceled from their work if they say something bad about Charlie Kirk, right? And they're now fighting in a defensive war. They can't afford to be holding ground that isn't worth it for them, right? So they've all vanished, and that is the biggest difference. It's not that we're mad; we've been mad for a long time. It's that the other side has given up the field. They've surrendered the field completely, and that'll mean there'll be true believers inside Wizards that are, true blue social justice warriors to the death. But most of those people are the ones that are like the writers, the few remaining writers that they have, right, and a few of the other employees, lower level employees. The executives have always been like, woke for profit, so to say, right? Like that they did it because they thought it was what the corporation had to do. And so those people are probably going to change their tune at some point. But there's the brand itself is now so damaged. My suspicion, if I absolutely had to guess, and it's not a guess that I'm giving large odds to because it's too unpredictable right now to say for sure. But if I had to guess right now, what'll probably happen is that very soon, as in like within a year maybe at the most, that Wizards of the Coast will license out D&D to some other company. Because that makes it not their problem, right? They make the money, but they don't have to deal with the problem. And I think that would be the most sense. That's what I would recommend that they do if I was an executive at Wizards of the Coast at this point, right? Because they can't do it in-house anymore. The house is too rotten.
Who would have the money to invest on that, on taking D&D from here?
Now that's the tough question, I think there are very few companies that would probably be able to pay what Wizards is asking for that are like RPG companies. But, it could be, for example, like Larian, Larian Studios. Mm-hmm. They would probably have the money, and maybe they want to do, to be the guys that also print D&D, right? Like people who are like some kind of fan in a different context. I mean, Elon Musk commented on that picture that you guys just showed. He commented twice on 2 different threads, right?
I didn't see that.
Oh, you never know. Elon Musk might say, "Yeah, I'll get the license," or he might even try to get them to sell D&D to him or all of Wizards, But I hope if he does, somebody mentions my name,
So, do you think with this, with the woke having other issues to worry, would it be the time when they start leaving the hobby? Or
I remember, this is the thing though, right? This is what's been proven now, is that the woke were never really, that many of them weren't really in the hobby, right? Because again, people are saying, well, they were being woke to make money, but they would have known from the time of like at least what was it called, Haven or whatever, the source book about going to magician college and going to prom, right? From that moment onwards, at the very latest, they had to know that yes, we have thousands of people on X and on Facebook and on TikTok that talk about how wonderful our games are. None of them are buying the books, right? They're not buying the books. And every book after that, with just slight occasional blips that went up, like Dragonlance sold a little more than the book before it, but that's because it was Dragonlance, right? But then it plummets back down again with Radiant Citadel, right? So every one of these, they were collapsing, right? It was gradually and more increasingly quickly than the sales were falling apart, and they knew that the woke people weren't buying these things, right? They would praise them to high heaven on like articles on websites and on social media, but they wouldn't actually buy the books, right? So they were never a part of the hobby. They were just a group of parasites that had clung on to the hobby, pretending that they were potential customers, right? This is like, there's that meme of like a guy who says, well, I'm not a Christian, but I know you are, so I'm going to quote this thing from the Bible that'll make you stop doing something I don't like. It's that sort of thing, right? They were there not to actually want any change for themselves. They just wanted to kill this hobby because they found it fundamentally offensive to them. I mean, in one sense, they kind of did. They did kill D&D. D&D could come back, though, and in fact, D&D continues to exist through the OSR in a way that is impossible to stop. So it's not a real victory for them, but it did kind of, in some ways you could have said, because they really they were trying to break into D&D for a lot longer than it appears, and contrary to what a lot of people think, Mike Merles was the guy that was retaining some level of sanity. He was I always said he was the little boy who had his finger in the dike, right? He was the one who was just like, but it was starting to leak in other places. It was sooner or later it was going to collapse. And the second he fucks off, it's going to collapse completely. And that's exactly what happened, right? When they finally managed to fire Mike Merles, then the whole thing got taken over by the wokes, and it became a very rapid spiral of decline. So they were able to do that, but that doesn't really kill D&D, but it did potentially kill a moment where D&D was at the highest level of name recognition and popularity since the early 80s. That was the moment where, you had Stranger Things and the Big Bang Theory and you had Critical Role, and all of these things were drawing attention to RPGs. And that was why they wanted to come in there. They wanted to swarm it. They wanted to denuder it of anything that reeked of heroic values, of morality. That's why they wanted to get rid of alignment, right? They wanted to remove these, colonialist ideas or imperialist ideas, the idea of individual heroism, the idea of meritocracy, all of these things. D&D actually is an incredible way of teaching a large number of important life lessons to young people, like classic D&D. Because it has all of those things. It has the heroic journey. It has like virtue versus evil, right? It has the idea of individualism and self-reliance, but also of teamwork, right? It has the idea of meritocracy and of being realistic in terms of your abilities, and all of those things. Like there's so much it can teach a person. I know it's not meant to be doing that, but that's a side effect of the enjoyment of play of the game, is that you learn important life lessons with D&D. And they hated all of those life lessons. Those were all things that they were standing against and wanted to destroy, right? So it makes sense that they would have tried to do that.
I know that you don't like the concept of novels, but I'm sure that you have read some novels that you like.
Yes, I mean, when I was a kid, I read a lot of novels, right? I mean, a lot of fantasy and sci-fi novels that were pretty terrible, and some that were really great, right? Like some of the truly the truly good novels in the genre, right? Like, and I mean, when I say great, I mean that they were really entertaining and that they had cool ideas, right? But even there, at the same time, I would say, like, in terms of the value of reading it, it has a lesser value than, and I mean, it's fine if you're like 12 or 15 or whatever, and you're reading like Lankmar. The Lankmar novels are a good example of like fantastic fiction, right? Or Elric, or Lord of the Rings, obviously, right? All of those are great stuff to read when you're a teenager, right? But in comparison to looking at things like mythology and legends and kind of these higher level that form the meta narrative of our civilization or of other civilizations that have their own merits, and lead you to thinking in more profound ways on kind of like these philosophical and spiritual matters, and that also are less formulaic, right? Like, well, the biggest problem with the novel is actually that it has a formula. We all know the formula, right? It's got like the first act, second act, third act, the climax, and then the denouement, and all that. You're taught that in school, right? You're literally taught the formula of every novel in history in that way, right? And it means that what happens in the novel is to certain degrees going to be formulaic. Now, of course, there are some great novels or things that are sort of like novels, close enough that people think of them as novels, that end up breaking those rules on purpose and doing some interesting things too, right?
For example.
Well, as one example is one of the books I really that I adored reading was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is it's sold either as a true story or as a novel, and it's not actually either, right? It's actually kind of like a North American version of magical realism, and it's written in this way that it's based partly on a true story, but it can't possibly have been like it happened there, and in the whole thing is not actually a story in the sense of like a novel. It's actually an essay on why the baby boomers failed. And it's like, like why the hippie movement collapsed and all of what happened. Where did they all go wrong, right? And it's like it's actually the biggest condemnation of the hippie movement ever written, like the best one. And so, like that's something most people think, well, yeah, it's a novel. Hunter S. Thompson wrote this novel, but it isn't. It's a Rolling Stone essay on the collapse of the hippie movement, but it's done in a way that treats it as if it's like this insane psychedelic fantasy realism trip, So that sort of thing is stuff I can find interesting still to some degree, and I recognize that I have a limited amount of time that I can spend doing stuff. And so if I've got the choice between reading something that is more fundamental, let's say, to human knowledge, versus something that is probably going to be just kind of maybe entertaining and maybe not, because maybe it'll just be formulaic pap, I'm not going to be that drawn to it, I would suggest people like read sacred texts and legends of heroes of every culture before they read another novel, start looking into that. There's stuff, there's such fast, like even in look at the Old Testament, like again, that is one of the greatest repositories of these unbelievable, and then, I think one of the things is, some of us anyways, I mean, those in the Western world, some of us get taught some of these Bible stories as kids, right? So you learn about Moses or Samson or, or King David or whatever, when you're like in elementary school, and you learn the kiddie version of that story, right? But if you actually like study the text of it in the Bible, and then you go and you start looking at the historical context of what was going on there, or the symbolism that is involved there, or the interpretations that have been presided by either rabbis or by Christian scholars or what have you, right? You end up discovering like that there's this depth to it that is way different. It's because people think that novels are like a better way than like old ancient legends. Oh, those ones were stupid. You don't even know what the person is thinking most of the time, right? It's like as if the thought process in a novel is part of what makes the novel better. No, you don't. Instead, you end up getting a bunch of symbols that create allegory that have secret moral meanings that you have to then actually think about to get to. And that makes it way more interesting. So and then historical chronicles are also like histories. I'd rather read books about history than novels. Now, in the modern era, there's a ton of history books that are really badly written because they've got political biases or whatever. But there's also a ton that are good, right? But classic history is what I enjoy reading the most. Like when you look at these chronicles that were written at the time of things or something, and sometimes those things intermix, right? Like La Mort d'Arthur, one of the most famous parts of the Arthurian saga, right, was actually written during the War of the Roses by Sir Thomas Malory, who was a knight who fought in the War of the Roses, and he wrote it while he was imprisoned as a prisoner of war during the War of the Roses. And Malory was writing about the end of King Arthur's kingdom, that famous story with the last fight with him and Mordred and all that, right? But he was writing that, and this horrible story of slaughter, and it's actually him writing about the War of the Roses, right? He's taking his experience from this 30-year-long war that devastated Britain, and he's made it into a metaphor that is happening in his version of the end of Arthur's reign. And when you get that, like suddenly that makes the whole story much more interesting than just even though the story by itself is fascinating, right? But it makes it a whole other thing, So yeah, novels, comic books, very hard for me to get excited by those. There are always some exceptions, like The Invisibles, for example, was obviously an influence on The Invisible College, so was Promethea. But again, those are comics that were written by occultists who are using the comic as a venue to present their occult ideas, So they were very unusual for comics. And I don't mean to shit on people who like, if you enjoy, like if you just want to relax and read like Forgotten Realms novel number 836, right? Like, okay, you can do that, right? I'm not saying that it makes you a bad person or something, right? But I am saying that there's probably a lot of stuff that you could look into that might, like, especially if what we're talking about is inspiration for D&D, right? If you're bringing it back to RPGs, if all you're ever doing is looking at references from other D&D things, right? From D&D novels. Those novels, their influence is already D&D, right? So it's just turned into one big circle jerk, right? And there's going to be nothing new under that sun, right? So instead of that, look back at the people who made D&D. What were the things they were reading, right? This is one case in which Appendix N at least makes some sense, right? Because you can look at that and suddenly you see these people, right? Lieber, Tolkien, oh, Jesus Christ, what was his name? The guy that made Conan, Howard, and all the other guys, all the people in Appendix N. Look at them, right? And then You could read some of those novels, but then look at what those people were reading, right? And it's always going to be stuff that is going to be more deeper down the fundamental well of myth and legend than what you've read until that point, right? So what is the thing that inspired the guy who made this work that you think is awesome, but actually is mostly a very nice homage to something hundreds or maybe thousands of years earlier, right? Because those guys were reading either the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, or they were reading the Arthur saga, or they were reading, the stories of the Norse gods or the Greek gods or the heroes. They were reading the Iliad or the Odyssey, right? And if you're not reading those things, you're not going to be that. You're not going to be Fritz Lieber. Right? The best you could possibly be is second-rate Fritz Lieber, and you'll probably be like third or fourth-rate Fritz Lieber, right? So, the idea is, look at what these guys were studying, and then you're going to get an idea of what's going down, right? I can see that Judd is making some recommendations that are pretty good ones. Project Gutenberg, yeah, it's a very good place to check out. Yeah, Jack Vance. I didn't mention Jack Vance. He's one of them too, right? But I'm not sure what Jack Vance's inspirations were. I haven't done much looking into that. He was a bit of a weirdo.
I never read Jack Vance. Well,
He
I've
had a
never
very weird style.
read. My favorites are not really fantasy, more like I like Howard. Not quite fantasy, more sword and sorcery, more like to my taste.
I love Wardplot's comment there. Modern RPGs inspired by furry fan fiction. RPG Pundit. Read the Bible. Oh, that's fantastic.
And because this is a Red Room, we have to talk about movies as well.
Okay, yeah.
Have you been watching anything new? I'm assuming that new movies will be mostly rubbish, but who knows? Maybe you have some.
It's hard to find anything good these days in terms of.
Not a movie, but you suggested something a while ago that we watched, and it was very good. It was a TV show.
Which one?
It's just the Letterman.
Yeah, that one was pretty good.
Sorry?
The Astronaut, the Argentinian.
Oh, the Astronaut. Yeah. That one was pretty good. Yeah, I did like that. That was I only knew about it because it's Argentinian, right? It was based on a very famous Argentinian comic. Right now, I'm watching season 2 of House of David, right? Which is coincidental. The season 1 came out when I was like in the early stages of thinking about this, like Sons of Heaven setting, right? And suddenly there was this. It's this TV series about King David, right? It's the life of King David. It's been spectacular, right? Like it's really well. Like it's not some cheap production, It's very, very, very well done. So that's one thing that I've been looking at, and trying to think about. There's been, I don't know, every once in a while I find some series that I find like good. I watched Mussolini, Son of the Century, which was a fairly controversial Italian miniseries. I guess it was Il Figlio del Secolo is what they would call it in Italian. It's based on a biography of Mussolini, and it became really controversial because a lot of the critics of it said it made Mussolini look too cool, right? Like it was because it's done like it's like the filmography of it is incredible, right? Like just the way that they've made it all together, and they've like incorporated into the show, into the series, this style that is covered in like the ideas of Italian futurism, right? Which was that art style that existed in the early 1920s in Italy. That Italian fascists embraced it, actually, right? And they were very into it. And it's done as this kind of like really weird, like it's the true story in the sense that it's a biography of the guy, right? But it's done in this crazy sense that's got like elements of like high art, and it's got it's a tremendous sense of irony and everything, but it's I was blown away by it. Like it was a friend of mine who's he has Italian roots, and he said, "Oh, I got this show. We want to watch this." And I was like, "A show about Mussolini?" And he goes, "Yeah, but it's really." And it is funny because there are moments like undoubtedly where you're looking at this and you're going like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, Mussolini," right? Like, and then you think, "Oh no, hang on," But it's so it was like. There's not going to be a season 2. Let's put it that way, right? They've made it very clear because it didn't. I think they thought that it was going to that Mussolini would be seen entirely as a buffoon in the thing. And there are moments where he has buffoonish, but of course he was a bit of a buffoon in real life, right? And the thing is, it's just they made it too honest for their own good, I think, right? Like the problem is I think it's actually, even though it's very surrealist, it ends up being historically very accurate, like the dates, the people involved, right? Like it's not a fairy tale, right? And yet it looks like a fairy tale visually, and those two things together, just like they cause this weird state that you have when you're watching it, right? And it was an 8-part series, and I was blown away by it. I just couldn't believe it. And so was my friend. So like it was that's I guess the best thing I've seen so far this year in terms of TV or movies.
Okay, we need to add that one to the watch list. I think I have known, I have heard about it, but just the name of it.
Is in English it's Mussolini, Son of the Century. In Italian, I think it's Il Figlio del Secolo. Yeah.
What about role-playing games? Have you seen something recently that you'd recommend?
Well, apart from my own stuff, I mean, right?
Yeah, of course, yes.
I think that, and apart from the wonderful products of the Red Room store, I think that the thing that impressed me the most that I've seen so far in 2025 was Barrows and Borderlands by Matt Tapp, which is I did a live stream with him. I did an RPG Pundit encounter with him, and I did a review of the first of the 4 booklets. So it's a box set originally that's meant to look like the old white box D&D, right? And the rules are the white box rules as the base, but then it goes completely gonzo, right? Like it's that, but it's in like this weird Vancian type, dying Earth type future with like these radioactive areas, and you can play mutants and things like that. And there's like this empire that has ruled for 1,000 years, but is now dying out, and terrible things are emerging. And like the world building that gets put into it, and put in very short, like in very little words, right? Very little. It doesn't go into like huge amounts of exposition or setting lore. That gives it this incredible kind of Vancian post-apocalyptic sword and sorcery feeling. It's fantastic, and the rules changes where they are, which is like in a lot of the things that I think are the best things to change, right? Like the magic system and stuff like that. They're really good. The psionics is good. All of it, the whole system was very well thought out. So I've been praising that a lot. And actually in the review that I did, the review video, I said this is the best RPG of 2025 that I had nothing to do with. Like that's what I would say. So Barrows and Borderlands, highly recommended.
The author is still a young guy, right?
Yeah, he's like in his 20s. Yeah, he's like in his early to mid 20s, and it's fantastic. The OSR will outlive us.
Yeah, apparently it's still growing, and
it is.
And new people are coming to the OSR.
And anytime D&D does badly, like official D&D does badly, the OSR does better. That's been proven in these last several years, right? Because even while D&D's sales were declining, OSR's Kickstarter crowdfunding and overall sales were all increasing steadily over the last 5 years. And if D&D just completely collapses, which it seems to have, I think that will lead even more people to be drawn into paying attention to the OSR.
And it probably won't be those larger games to replace it, like what was the
There's nothing like some people say, well, like Pathfinder, right?
Pathfinder,
yeah, but Pathfinder, like nowadays it doesn't exist. It's there. But it doesn't. The company is nothing like what it was back when 4th edition came out, right? Like there is no company that is the size of Wizards of the Coast in RPGs. There's a lot of kind of middle range companies that would have been seen as very small companies in like around 2002, right? If they existed back then. But now those are like the biggest ones we have, right? Like, like the guys who do Castles and Crusades or stuff like that, right? Those are mid-tier companies, right? And they are the highest companies available. So it's very difficult to me, unless there's like some outside investor or something. I don't think there is going to be a kind of Pathfinder type game that will come in and take the single dominant position over D&D, which will mean we're in uncharted territory, right? Because every other time that D&D has failed, there was something else, whether it was World of Darkness or whether it was Pathfinder. Now it's hard to know. Like maybe something will organically become like the biggest. Like maybe if somebody took, I don't know, like Shadow Dark and built an entire corporation around it and put in, $110 million of investment money, maybe they could take the place of D&D, right? But who's going to do that,
Yeah, take the risk to spend.
Incidentally, that would probably work for any company, for any game, right? Like whether it was, the Wretched system or Baptism of Fire or, any game that doesn't absolutely suck, because it's not really about the game, right? It's about having just something that is the industry leader, and pretty much any game that is close enough to a generic fantasy game could do that. Maybe not Baptism of Fire. Maybe Lion and Dragon would be the better choice. It's more traditional fantasy. But you know what I mean. So Elon, if you're listening, I just need $350 million. If you can give me $350, I will make the #1 RPG in the world.
That's usually the problem. It would require a huge amount of money.
Well, they used to say that back in the 80s and 90s. They used to say about RPGs, right? That how can you end up getting $1 million in RPGs from RPGs? It's like, well, start with 2 million.
But there used to be larger companies back then, right?
There were, but a ton of them went back.
Some of them are still around.
All of them died, right? Yeah, they are, but usually in very diminished form, right? Like Palladium Games is still around, but it's basically a shell now, right? Like, and Chaosium is still around, but it doesn't live up to the level of production that it once had, right? It's certainly not what it once was, in terms of, and certainly it hasn't had a big hit for a very long time, right? Like all of the best things Chaosium ever did was in the late 80s, and apart from those, there's very, very few, right? Like I guess technically, Traveler now is Mongoose, right? So it's not even them. So,
yeah.
Out of the ones that were around originally, there's hardly anything.
Yeah, White Wolf disappeared just into nothing. I don't know. I think it's a company again, I guess. I'm not sure about that. White Wolf.
Yeah, but it's a different company now, basically.
Yeah,
they went broke like twice. Yeah,
it has nothing to do with the original one.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost 2 hours live stream. Is there something that you would like to add before we wrap this up?
Myself, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank you for the invitation. I'm always glad to be here. I would say, I suspect most of the people in this give a wave if you've never heard of me in the chat. If you don't know who I am, right?
Yeah,
If
I
you didn't
don't
know who
think
I am until now,
probably
but
not.
I suspect that most of the people that like the Red Room also already know me. So you already know my products. I would say if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And and check out my games. I think you'll find them very worthwhile. Um, I I hope that we'll be seeing even after the Red Room store closes, we'll be seeing new projects from the Red Room in the coming years. And that I suppose you guys are going to keep up the channel. I hope maybe I'll come. I tend to come on here I think once a year or so. So
Yeah, I will certainly keep.
It's a tech issue. The story is really a tax issue.
yeah, I was surprised by that.
We don't want to risk it.
But the site will be the same. I'm going to keep. I'll still pay for the store. I'm just not going to sell anything there. But the store will be there. It's as a
website.
It will be there, so I can put the links to somewhere else. Mostly Lulu, and there are some stuff being sold at itch.io. Though I assume that it won't be lasting long because they'll probably ban us sooner or later.
If they ever notice we are there, they're going to ban us.
Yeah, I don't think they are paying attention to the role playing games they sell. They're probably mostly about computer games more than RPGs. That's why we are still there. But yeah, the site will still be exactly the same, and probably we might even do more videos. We're trying now again to have more guests.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say for anybody who's watching before we finish is that on Sunday, it is the newest episode of the RPG Pundit Encounter. And it's going to be an interesting one because I'm going to be interviewing a YouTuber called the Dungeon Minister. And this is a guy who has a YouTube channel. He talks about D&D. He runs this, he does live streams of his campaign, I think, and stuff like that. But he is also an Anglican minister, like as in an ordained Anglican priest, right? So we're going to be talking about RPGs, and we're going to be talking a lot about religion, I think, as an academic and a practicing minister. It'll be pretty interesting, I hope. So check that out. That'll be on Sunday at what is it, 9 p.m. Eastern, I think. Yeah. So check it out on my channel. Don't miss it.
Before we finish, I would just like to remind you that we are having a sale, a Halloween sale, 40% discount on our products. On checkout, just use the promo code, which is Halloween sale, and we'll have lots of stuff there. It's except the Pundit files, of course. But though, if you want to, until the end of the year, if you want to do a Pundit file sale, you can also do that. Just
well, the problem is then they wouldn't be 350.
Yeah,
need to be 350. That's part of the spell.
Okay, so let's wrap it. Thanks for coming to our channel again, Pundit, and you'll probably be talking about your new game soon or soonish.
I hope so.
Whenever you have some more stuff to tell about it, perhaps before you release it or maybe after. Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, and all you guys. Thanks for watching and commenting. And